Hello, everyone out there. Welcome to today's Royals Rundown podcast presented by Royals Review. This is Jake Milham once again, joined by the crazed man, Jeremy Greco. Jeremy, you're giving me some crazy eyes, friend. You're trying to throw me off early. Okay, this is the peak offseason content.
Absolutely. Gotta start high so we can just coast all the way down into the season.
Listen, it's really not that long between now and February where we are really going to be ramping up into the 2025 season. But for everything between now, you got a lot of free agency. We're going to have some trades. We're going to have some Rule 5 draft. I think that could be pretty pivotal. You need to go check out royalsreview.com if you want to keep tabs on everything. The rumblings in the mornings. No more game threads or game recaps. That's fine, though. You can interact with other Royals fans down in the rumblings. That's kind of the popular thing.
Just a small correction. We will still have game threads, playoff day game threads every day.
Oh, really?
It won't be Royals.
I forgot about
threads.
You know what? Yeah. I didn't even think about that. That's my bad. And of course,
we all forget it on a regular basis too. Saturday, I thought the game started later than it did, so I didn't post my game thread until the game was like 2 innings in. So,
it happens. It happens. If you want to interact with us or let your thoughts be known on the podcast, you can interact with the royalsreview.com article that hosts this podcast episode. So go check it out and you won't regret it. I can guarantee that. All right. So Jeremy, it is a light itinerary today, but we have plenty to talk about still. Later on in the episode, we will start off our off-season grading process by talking about the outfielders, and we'll lay out some of the parameters that are going to help drive this process through the off-season. But we do have to start off with some major MLB news. We got our Gold Glove finalists. All right, they already know the winners, but we don't. Finalists, yeah, I know. Yeah. Since they already know the winners,
the quotes, yeah.
It's
really the winner, the runner-up, and the first runner-up.
Yeah, there you go. They're going to be. We have to wait a long time. I don't feel like we usually have to wait this long. They're not going to announce the winners until November 3rd, which is very very late. Yeah, I mean it's still a couple weeks. Like that's a long time between the finalists. I think.
I don't know. I don't usually pay that close of attention to it.
Okay.
Like the Gold Gloves are fun to talk about for a few minutes, but they don't mean anything to me. Like when someone's like, Salvador Perez has won 6 Gold Gloves, that's what's going to get him in the Hall of Fame. I'm like, sure it is.
Hey, it's nice to have accolades and some more metal on the trophy. Yeah. On the trophy shelf, but there are plenty of Royals finalists, so we'll run down those real quick. They got 2 pitchers out of the 3 American League finalists. Seth Lugo and Cole Reagans were just great on the mound, but they were also pretty dang good defensively, according to the process. Plus, behind the dish, not even the primary catcher this season, Freddy Fermin, is also a finalist among the AL catchers. And then lastly, to no one's surprise, Bobby Witt Jr. Just really turning things around in the field from his rookie year. Well, now he is finally a Gold Glove finalist. And this is what I do want to say, Jeremy, before we dive into it a little bit more. People can get easily confused by the outs above average disparity. Okay, I know that was a big thing with Bobby last year. It's like, hey, he's amongst the best in outs above average. Why isn't he even in consideration? I know that was a big thing in the AL third base spot, but just so everyone is on the same page, this is how it works out. So the 30 MLB managers and up to 6 coaches from each team vote from a pool of players in their league. And the votes comprise 75% of those selections. And then another statistic, the Sabre Defensive Index, counts for the other 25%. So this isn't something that we can just point to fielding percentage or outs above average or really any one thing and say, this is what drives Gold Glove winners. And the Sabre Defensive Index is not a publicly available statistic at any one point. The last update they put out was on August 11th. Now, I wrote an article about it a while back saying, like, hey, the Royals have 4 of the top, I think, 7 AL pitchers in Sabre Defensive Index. But Bobby Witt Jr. was leading by a healthy margin at that update, nearly 2 full points. And then I'm trying to get back to the catchers because I didn't feel like Freddy wasn't terribly high at that point.
Nope.
He was seventh, thank you. 7th at that time. So he either made some major leaps and bounds or he just barely squeaked in.
Or he got a bunch of votes.
Yeah, that as well. So what are you surprised by these finalists, Jeremy? Like, what are your takeaways?
I'm not super surprised about Reagan's or Lugo, except in that it's both of them.
Yeah.
It was pretty well talked about this year how the Royals pitchers had a focus on defense and how they were rating very well there. As you said, they've got 4 in the top 7, or is it top 8, I think. And so you've got of the golly, my brain is turned off of the Sabre Defense Index leaders. So you've got Seth Lugo's 2nd, Cole Reagan's is 4th, Michael Wacha's 5th, and then Brady Singer is 8th.
Yep.
So they did really well there. Bobby Witt Jr., again, doesn't surprise anyone. He rated very well defensively. He's a superstar. Those guys are always going to get votes, even when the defensive metrics don't necessarily like them, which was one of the reasons it was surprising he wasn't a finalist, quote unquote, last year. Yep. Freddy Fermin is shocking because I didn't realize that he had enough innings behind the plate to qualify. But I looked it up at one point, and he was tied for 31st in innings caught this year. So guys aren't necessarily catching a lot of innings, and he got some regular starts back there, especially in the middle of the season, August, late July, August, early September, as the Royals were like trying to figure out what can we do for our offense, and he had been hitting, and then of course he stopped. That's when he stopped getting the playing time.
Right. So when this update came out, Freddie was sitting 7th amongst all AL catchers, which is not a bad spot to be. The leader at the time, Cal Raleigh, had a 9.7 on this scale. Freddie had a 4.5, which is pretty good to be, but not really close to that finalist territory that we were expecting at that time.
Yeah, one question I have is this a counting stat, or is this an average stat? Because Cal Raleigh, on the other end of the spectrum, led all catchers in MLB this year in innings caught. So it could be that his defense, his SDI is so high just because he caught so many innings.
Yeah.
It's really hard to say.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm not a sabermetrician by any stretch. I'm trying to learn a little bit more about that process this offseason, but I don't just they pull from so many different sources that I don't know what accounts for what, which is frustrating when you look at this, especially after MLB at large has been pushing the outs above average so much since Baseball Savant kind of became a little bit more mainstream, and they brought that statistic around. For all of you out there wondering, Salvador Perez was still in the positive in this defensive index metric, but he just wasn't great. He was at 0.5, which is very low, ranked 10th at the time of that August 11th update. Not terrible, but that does call into question more, what does this statistic count for regarding catchers specifically? Because, you see Austin Wells high up there. Well, we've heard all the talk about Austin Wells and his framing and things like that. How much does that count towards a catcher's SDI? Things of that nature. So I'm not gonna dive into that too much, because at the end of the day, it only does count for a quarter of the voting. If he was that far behind and is a finalist, I have to believe that this is just a glowing recommendation from coaches around the league as a whole, which is I think it's great. I think it's an awesome endorsement for one of the more unheralded players in the Royals organization. Am I thinking of that too highly, Jeremy?
No, I don't think so. I was super impressed. I being that he's eighth and being that voting or seventh or eighth and being that voting is 75% of the component. Obviously, the people around the league really respect his defensive ability, which I think makes a lot of sense. Also, just want to throw out there that Salvador Perez last year had a negative 6.3 SDI. So SDI hasn't liked his defense in a hot minute either. He wasn't on 2022. I look back at 2023. He was also negative there. So even having a 0.5 this year is indicative of just how improved he has been behind the plate while working with the new coaching staff.
Yeah. Now, I want to take this moment to pivot into some other news regarding Freddy Fermin. So Rustin Dodd over at The Athletic reported that Freddy Fermin, quote, will draw trade interest from other clubs, not has or is, but will. And, you know, we all know about Freddie and he didn't have a season. I think his ending really cooled that down. But at the end of the day, he had a very good season, especially for a backup catcher. It was still a very valuable player. Looking at the performance, and then also his payroll impact, he will be a very impactful player if a team wanted to go out and get him. Would you be disappointed if the Royals got some fair value of some sort for Freddy Fermin?
No, I think it makes a ton of sense. Honestly, we talked at various points throughout the season that other teams would absolutely look at him as a starting catcher, and the Royals, they need some reinforcements as I think we're going to talk about here more in a little bit, and as the offseason goes on. They're not, they went to the playoffs this year, but they only won 86 games. 86 games might not get you into the playoffs in 2025. And that's if you don't backslide at all, which seems like a real possibility. Oh, yeah. If you can find someone who wants to pay for Freddy Fermin, like he's a starting catcher, and he can't start for you, he can bring back more value than he can provide.
That's fair. My only concern with trading away Freddy Fermin at this point, and we spoke about this a little bit on the last episode, is that he is one of two Royals catchers on the 40-man roster right now. There's not really any catchers right now in the organization that are screaming, "Hey, I am ready for that backup spot. I'm totally ready for that role." And like that's one reason why the Royals carried a guy like Austin Nola on the 40-man roster for so long this season. It's because they didn't have another option in the system. Now, I did write about like, hey, I love Duran, who had a good season in AA and a okay debut season in AAA, but he's in his third organization in the past 3 years for a reason. He's good. I just don't think he has an MLB ceiling. So if you go out and you trade Freddy Fermin, it does put you in a bind, especially with an aging Salvador Perez, then having to look at carrying the lion's share of the innings behind the plate. I think that's a big risk, Jeremy.
Well, the way I look at it is that, again, we're talking about your backup catcher, and a backup catcher on a team that features Salvador Perez, who was willing to play a lot more first this year. Maybe we'll play more first next year, but you can find backup catchers in free agency for extremely cheap. Austin Nola was a guy they picked up at the very tail end of the offseason. If they go looking at the beginning of the offseason, there's going to be a whole bunch of guys out there. None of them are going to be as good as Freddie. But again, if you could trade Freddie and get, a decent relief pitcher or a corner outfielder who looks like he's ready to pop off, then you have to do that and accept that your backup catcher is not going to be as good.
Yeah. And I will say this. So Freddie's performance, whether it be defensively with the bat, worth a 1.9 FWAR on the season. Very good, especially for a backup the leading option on the free agent market was a 2.0 FWAR from Yasmani Grandal, who's at 36 right now.
Grandal was that valuable this year?
Yeah, that he was for the Pittsburgh Pirates.
I had understood he was terrible. I must have heard something wrong.
I believe the rumors of his demise were greatly exaggerated.
So Yasmani Grandal got $2.5 million this year.
Right.
You could go get Yasmani Grandal for $2.5 million if you're the Royals. $5 million if you think that you got to outbid somebody for him.
Exactly.
And then trade Freddie and you haven't lost much.
No, and
he's not as good defensively, but he's probably a better hitter.
Probably so. So I think that's going to be an interesting spot that the team could be in. Would they be transactional to that scale? Freddy Fermin has been in this organization for a very, very long time. Are they willing to part ways with him if it means improving via trade at another position? I think it's a valuable thing to look at. I think it's a viable thing to look at, according to Rustin Dodd as well. If any more rumors or speculation pops up, you can be sure to find it over at royalsreview.com. You can also follow along with Royals Review on Twitter and Facebook at Royals Review, or you can just follow along with us. Our social media links are down in the podcast description below. So, Jeremy, now that we're done with that chatter, let's go ahead and kick off this grading exercise that we are going to do. Some ground rules that I would say, some barriers that we have set up for ourselves. So, number one, looking by position group, we are only looking at players who have at least 50 plate appearances for the Royals in 2024 at that position. So, say, listen, Tyler Gentry, he had a little bit of action up here at the major league level. He doesn't meet that cutoff. And we're not going down that minute. I'm not going to be grading Robbie Grossman up here. We're just going to keep it moving. And then Jeremy had a good way to put this, and I think it's appropriate for this position group. He said, quote, "I'm not comparing Kyle Isbell to Jarren Duran or Aaron Judge, but I am grading him based on whether and how much he helped the Royals this year." That is for the overall impact grade that we will be starting off with. So, Jeremy, before you just start listing them off, who was your top pick for overall impact amongst the Kansas City Royals outfielders?
Kyle Isbell.
Yep, I think that's the only option, man. He is mine as well. He led this position group by a good margin when it came to FWAR, but also by games played. He was amongst the top getters in plate appearances, playing in the outfield. He had an overall solid season. We spoke about that on the last podcast episode, so I'm not going to exasperate that too much. But Jeremy, could you go down your list ranked by overall impact from the 8 qualified Kansas City Royals outfielders?
Yeah, though I just realized looking at this list that it's only got Nelson Velasquez as outfielder at bats, not all of his at bats.
Correct.
So that threw me off. So I have to check that real quick. Turns out he did a lot worse when he was in the outfield than when he was designated hitting. So I'm going to go Kyle Isbell, Tyrone Blanco, Garrett Hampson, Hunter Renfroe, Tommy Pham, Adam Frazier. No, excuse me. Nelson Velasquez, MJ Melendez, Adam Frazier. Flip MJ Melendez and Nelson Velasquez. So let me try this again. Kyle Isbell, Tyrone Blanco, Hunter Renfroe, Garrett Hampson, Tommy Pham, MJ Melendez, Nelson Velasquez, Adam Frazier.
Okay. All right. Mine is a little bit different looking, but that is quite all right. That's why we both put ours out there. So for overall impact, I start off with Kyle Isbell, and then I go to, I hate to say it, I go to Garrett Hampson, and then I go to Tyrone Blanco, Tommy Pham, Hunter Renfroe, Nelson Velasquez, Adam Frazier, and MJ Melendez sitting at last. Now, out of this group, only 3 players appeared in more than 100 games in the outfield: Kyle Isbell, Hunter Renfroe, and MJ Melendez, which makes sense. Your left fielder, center fielder, and right fielder. But the other players didn't really have a whole lot of opportunities in the outfield. Like, it wasn't even we have a guy who had 90 games or 80 games. The 4th highest was Garrett Hampson with 64 games. Yeah. So there was a pretty big disparity between your everyday outfielders and your bench outfielders. Excuse me, Jeremy. Are there? I mean, just looking at the numbers, are there any guys who surprised you in the outfield? Like, they had a worse season than I was expecting.
Garrett Hampson, we railed against him all year. The fact that he ended up with a positive FWAR based primarily with his defensive skill. And the only defensive thing I remember him doing is dropping an easy fly ball. I think it was in Colorado center field. It was Colorado, Boston. It was on the road, I'm pretty sure. And then the one that surprised me the most in a bad way is MJ Melendez, who we talked about. How much his defense had improved this year, and then by the time we got to the end of the year, it wasn't looking so good anymore, and it kind of cratered again his FWAR, which is it's not the only thing I look at, but it is one of the primary things I was looking at while I was kind of trying to evaluate this.
Same here. Looking at the negative first, I was surprised by Hunter Renfroe's negative defensive value overall. I remember when they signed him this past offseason, we spoke a lot about his strong arm. Like, hey, he has one of the elite arm strengths for an outfielder. He can cover a decent amount of ground, but like all in all, he ranked as the 2nd worst defensive outfielder on this Kansas City Royals squad, according to Fangraphs.
Yeah, he ended up not having much range at all. He's kind of a statue out there. And he has an arm, but he threw it into the ground a couple of times, which really hurt his defensive contributions as well.
Right, and that's another thing about these statistics. They will, situations will deem their value a lot more. And I can think of I can think of a couple instances where a ball went over Hunter Renfroe's head, or he had a poor throw that allowed runs, and so that definitely did not help the Kansas City Royals. In a good way, I was surprised to see that playing in the outfield, Dairon Blanco actually leading this position group when it comes to weighted runs created plus. Now, no one was over average, unfortunately. No one even broke 100, but Blanco sitting there at 96 is pretty good for a reserve player, I would say. Batting .259, getting on base at a .312 clip, like nothing elite, nothing award worthy, but definitely better than I originally anticipated. Now, how much of that is buoyed by his massive Crayola performance, we don't know.
What?
Yeah.
He only had 132 plate appearances. That was a good chunk of them.
Yeah, that it was.
That was probably 10% of his plate appearances came in that series.
Which is, I don't know if that's go ahead.
The good news, I'm looking at his overall season stats, not just his stats when he was in the outfield. So the good news is that he had a .318 BABIP, so it's not like he was wildly lucky while he was earning the stats he earned.
Right.
And he walked at a fair pace, a 6.1%, which is not good, but it is good by Royal standards. So yeah, he and the base stealing, I don't think you can overrate how good of a base stealer he was, but it would be hard. 30 stolen bases as primarily a pinch runner is just, that's Terrence Gore didn't do that.
No.
Gerard Dyson didn't do that. Gerard Dyson got more playing time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just really super impressive. It helped make the Royals the only team in MLB with 3 players with 30 or more stolen bases, with him, Bobby Witt Jr. and Maikel Garcia. So that's It's pretty crazy. He was among the league leaders in stolen bases this year.
Yeah,
despite starting less than half the games.
Yeah, we don't talk about that too much as we probably should be talking about it more. Jeremy, you brought up BABIP, so I do want to point that out. So at the bottom of our lists, we have Adam Frazier and MJ Melendez. But those two are players who just massively suffered from poor batted ball luck. Adam Frazier sitting there at a 236 BABIP, which is very, very far below the league average. And then MJ Melendez not far behind him at a 238. I mean, that it certainly didn't help their offensive performance, but I don't think it was the only issue they faced at the plate, certainly.
Yeah, one of the things I like to look at when I'm like, all right, so the BABIP is low. Well, how are they doing on the, are they actually hitting it hard? Because if you're not hitting it hard, well, yeah, your BABIP's going to probably be low. Maybe it isn't luck. Maybe you're just bad. He ranks very poorly in expected slugging, in average velocity, exit velocity, and hard hit percentage. He's mediocre squaring it up. He is good at not chasing and not swinging and missing. That and when he gets good launch angles in the sweet spot, but that's it.
Yeah.
So he didn't. His BABIP problems are no bat strength.
Right.
Now, MJ Melendez last year was very good, had all kinds of red on all of these metrics about like, oh, he's hitting it hard, blah, blah, blah. And this year, his average exit velocity is still pretty high, 80th percentile. Hard hits still pretty high, 74th percentile. But when he gets into the sweet spot, he hits it into the ground. When he doesn't barrel it very often, despite the fact that he hits it hard. And so that results in an expected batting average of only 240. Yeah. And he ended up with, on the season, a 206 batting average. So your batting average is usually going to be a little lower than your expected batting average, I think. His stats, it wasn't just that his stats went down this year, like all of the surrounding stats went, like his average exit velocity went from 93.2 last year to, get this back here, 93.2 last year to 91.1.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound like much of a difference, but think about a pitcher whose fastball goes from 93 to 91. It's much more hittable all of a sudden. His barrel rate went way down. And even his hard hit rate went down. His hard hit rate was almost 50% last year. And this year it's only 45%. So it does feel like he might be getting worse. Also, he's chasing more this year. He's not whiffing as much, but is that better if you're chasing pitches out of the strike zone and making contact with them? That can result in some bad contact.
It can.
It's not a good year for either of them, even if you're like, well, they might have been a little bit unlucky by BABIP. Yeah, but they weren't hitting the ball well either.
Correct. Listen, so we already kind of focused on bats. So let me go ahead and run down my grades for bats alone.
All right.
Kyle Isbell, I got him at a C+. Garrett Hampson, I have him at a D-. Tommy Pham, I have him at a C. Dairon Blanco, I have it a B-. Hunter Renfroe, I have it a C-. Nelson Velasquez, I have it at a D-. Adam Frazier, an F. And MJ Melendez at a D-. Just not a great showing when you only have one player breaking out of the C range. What about you, though, Jeremy?
Yeah, I've got Kyle Isbell with a C. Dairon Blanco, I will give... Really, he didn't have enough at bats for me to really want to grade him there.
That's okay.
So I'll give him an overall grade, but I won't give him a batting grade.
All right, fair enough.
Garrett Hampson gets an F. Hunter Renfroe gets a C. He did better than Isbell, but his defense was so much worse that he can't carry it as well. So I'm going to give him a C-. MJ Melendez, I'm going to give a D+. Nelson Velasquez, I'm going to give a D. And Adam Frazier, I will also give an F.
Okay. Glove, I think, is also not going to really surprise too many folks. Kyle Isbell, I gave an A-. Garrett Hampson, I gave a B+. Tommy Pham, I gave a B-. Dairon Blanco a C-. Hunter Renfroe a D+. Nelson Velasquez a C-. Adam Frazier a C+, and then MJ Melendez a C, which is probably a much more gracious grade than I should have given. What about you, Jeremy?
I forgot to give Pham a batting grade.
Oh, what you got?
He gets a D.
He gets a D? All right, what you got for gloves?
For gloves, Kyle Isbell gets an A-. And Garrett Hampson gets a B-. And everyone else gets an F.
Yeah, that bad, huh?
Yeah, the defense just was not there. MJ Melendez can have a D. How about that? I'll give MJ Melendez a D.
Look at you being nice. And that was, I think that is going to be a disappointing thing from
Tommy Pham can have a D too. Whatever.
I think that is going to be a disappointing thing from the 2024 season because MJ Melendez did start off so strong in the field, and he had some great moments later on down the stretch as well. But overall, it just seemed like some of that early season progress we saw, kind of the facade cracked a little bit under the summer heat.
And one of the things you have to tell yourself is that just because you see,
you're good.
Just because you see someone make a diving catch doesn't make them a good defender.
True.
If they were a better defender, they would have caught that ball without having to dive for it, maybe. So you have to really kind of evaluate that sort of stuff and not just be awed by the flashiness.
There you go. I think
like
that's
if they were ranging really far into for it, okay, well, you went really far for that ball. Like MJ Melendez made that catch, he overran it and then turned around and caught it or something. That looks really cool, but he overran it, so that wasn't a good defensive play. No. It's a bad defensive play that had a really cool looking finish.
Exactly. So that is just the first entry into the position group grading that we will be doing this offseason. It's not going to last the entire offseason, but definitely there will be sexier position groups to break down and grade based off of their 2024 performance.
I would bet that I would argue, and I think successfully, that the outfield was the weakest position group for the Kansas City Royals in 2024.
Well, I don't think that there's I don't think that there's any way that you can debate that personally.
Yeah. Some people might try to say it was the bullpen, but the outfield started awful. Hunter Renfroe and MJ Melendez got hot for a couple months in the middle of the year, but Adam Frazier was still bad. Garrett Hampson still wasn't helpful. Well, he was technically, but he still wasn't what you would have wanted him to be. Dairon Blanco can run, but that's it. And so, you had a couple guys get hot, and you're like, well, if they stay hot, then fine, this works. They didn't stay hot. The bullpen was mediocre for most of the year. Then it got really bad for a little bit, and then it was really good at the end of the year. So I really do think, and especially looking at who's on the roster now, as compared to the beginning of the year, because the Royals did add to the bullpen as the year went on.
Yeah.
Chris Bubich, Hunter Harvey, Lucas Urseg. Whereas the outfield didn't really get additions. It got Tommy Pham and Robbie Grossman, but they ended up not being positive contributors.
Mm-hmm. Precisely. And if you go and you look at how they stack up to other teams and the value that they got out of their outfield positions, well, like left field, the Royals ranked 28th out of 30 teams. Center field, they're still they're higher. It's their highest, but the Royals still rank pretty low. Same thing with even right field. So go ahead.
I was just going to say, Kyle Isbell gets a B-, right? And so you're like, well, you could do better than that. And obviously you can. You could get Aaron Judge or Jarren Duran, and you would be better in center field. But you can't improve center field as much as easily as you can left field. When left field is 28th in baseball, well, you get left field up to average, and you've jumped 13 places. Yeah. You look a lot better. If Kyle Isbell's 10th or 12th in MLB in center field, it's not good, but you can't get him as high. Even if you got Aaron Judge out there in center field, he's not as much an improvement over Kyle Isbell as some average left fielder would be over MJ Melendez.
Precisely. I couldn't have thought it up better myself, Jeremy.
Well, Aaron Judge is actually probably a bad person to use for that comparison because he's unreal. But if you get a better Byron Buxton, he's not going to be enough better than Kyle Isbell, move the needle as much as getting an average guy in left field would be.
Correct. And I think people need to this is where WAR does come into value or come into play, because you can see, okay, let's say you just every single game you came up with new free agents for a season. Well, you're going to have this certain record. What can you get better at to raise that record? So, like, for example, the Royals, they had, as a team, 40.2 FWAR on the season. All of their players combined for a 40 wins above replacement level.
Yep.
Now, how can you add to that? How can you make that 43? How can you try to match the Houston Astros with their 53.9% total, or 53.9 total, excuse me? So that's just where you got to be transactional. This is where you really win in the margins, because those margins will add up over time.
And that's, like you're saying, this is where the WAR comes in. Kyle Isbell has a 1.4 WAR. You can improve on that. That's not a good WAR. It's not even a mediocre WAR, really. For an MLB starter, you're usually looking for, you want at least 2.
Yep.
That said, MJ Melendez comes in at negative 0.3, which means you should be able to improve the team by calling up some random dude, John Rave, from AAA Omaha. And that's where you're like, well, if I could change out MJ Melendez for someone as good as Kyle Isbell in left field, suddenly I've gained 2 WAR. Whereas if I change out Kyle Isbell for a 2 WAR guy in center field, I've only gained half a WAR.
Mm-hmm. So that's just more food for thought this offseason. We're gonna have a lot of moves, a lot of, well, how does this guy fit? I mean, it's already starting up on social media. Some of them are more realistic than others, but that's okay. It's all right to dream. All right. I wouldn't have. Folks were really debating the Seth Lugo signing right after it happened.
I remember that. People were like, I don't know about this one, guys. And I was like, I do want to say I was pretty happy about that signing, honestly, for that amount of money.
Yeah.
I was like, well, I mean, he looked good. You got to pay guys, so let's see what happens. And it worked. Will he be that good again next year? I don't know, but he basically earned it in 1 year. Honestly,
pretty much. If you want to go make sure that Jeremy's telling the truth, though, you can go crawling back in our podcast archives and make sure you clip it if he's being wrong and send it on to me, and I'll put him on blast for you.
I was actually more concerned about the Waka signing than I was the Lugo signing. I was wrong about that one. Yeah.
Hey, listen, I am a known Michael Waka believer. All right, that is just who I am. All right, man. Why don't we go ahead and get on out of here with some Royals reviews? How's that sound?
Sure, why not?
All right. So I'll start off with a quick one, because I think I'm doubling down, but it's been long enough since I reviewed it, so I don't really care. I don't pick up books again a lot. Usually I will, especially nonfiction ones, I'll read them once and then I was like, hey, that was good, and then keep it moving. I picked up another book and I'm listening to it this time, and it's called Winning Fixes Everything: How Baseball's Brightest Minds Created Sports' Biggest Mess. It's from The Athletic's Evan Drellich, I believe is how you say his last name. And it's about the Houston Astros and how they became the monster that we know them as today. I love the process. And I love hearing all this backstory. I think it's a great read, but I'm even enjoying it more as I'm listening to it. So Winning Fixes Everything. I got it from my local library, so I'm sure that you can find it if you really look for it. Jeremy, on to you.
All right, I'm going to review today. I have a choice between an indie game that's very short, but I kind of really like, or a AAA game that's very long that I'm kind of mediocre about. So I'm going to give you the indie game.
Okay.
So that would be Deliver Us the Moon, which is the only subpar thing about this game really is its whole premise, which is that in 2030 there's an energy crisis on Earth, so they send more people to the moon, and they discover helium-3, which is, I believe it's called an isotope of helium that they can use to power fusion reactors that they can then power the Earth with, because now the fossil fuels have run out. And they do this by sending microwave transmissions from the moon to the Earth. And I'm just sitting here like, you can't just put a giant satellite dish on the moon and point it at the Earth and catch the energy and in one place, and you like they rotate. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
What are we doing? The premise is a little ridiculous, but it's really kind of fun. Where you go, you have to the power station. The power stopped coming from the moon for some reason, and everyone on Earth has pretty much given up hope. So you and a few other people are trying to figure out what happened and get back to the moon and get energy coming back to the Earth to like save everyone. And it's kind of a walking simulator-esque game, but there is some environmental puzzle solving, and it's not a long game. It's 5 to 8 hours. 8 hours would be like if you were like me and you got easily confused and lost. Probably closer to 5, most people. But you find all this, like there's a lot of environmental storytelling, and there's a lot of like, you know, like a walking simulator where you find little like audio clips or little notes that tell you some stuff about what's going on. And it's really cool, like experientially.
Okay.
The mechanics are solid. Like I said, the plot is like the basis of the plot is bonkers, but you're trying to find, you know, there were some people that were trying to solve this problem, and you're trying to find them, and you're trying to figure out like what happened to everyone on the moon. Why aren't they there anymore? Why did the power stop coming? And it's just like a really it's a mood. It's a mood. Playing the game is like I'm like I am in this mood. It's enveloping me. I feel lots of interesting and fun emotions. It's a cool mystery.
Okay. All right. What's the name of it again?
Deliver Us the Moon, and it's free on PlayStation Plus for PlayStation Plus users. PlayStation Plus users, I imagine it's on Xbox Game Pass. Like I said, it's like $5. There's a sequel called Deliver Us Mars, which I haven't played yet. I'm going to, but yeah. Just finished that over the weekend because it was a real short game. Like I said, it was real interesting. I found it like the whole thing just interesting.
Hell yeah. Okay, we'll go check that out if you're looking for a new indie game to pick up. That is going to do it for us today on the Royals Rundown podcast, presented by Royals Review. Make sure you go check them out for all of your Kansas City Royals related needs. If you want to follow along with us on social media, we would greatly appreciate it. Our links are down in the podcast description below. If you would like to, please subscribe and follow to the podcast wherever you're listening to us on. It really helps us out, and make sure we are doing something right and that you actually want to keep listening to us. But for everyone out there still listening, thank you so much for joining us today. And until next time, go Royals.